Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we're looking at the attack on a Christmas market in Berlin Monday night, one that has stirred Germany and Europe. We're doing so in the company of journalist and commentator Roland Tichy, president of the Ludwig Erhard Stiftung think tank, who joins us from Frankfurt. From Husum in northern Germany, Alexander Ritzman, executive director of the European Foundation for Democracy. Shoshana Fine of the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po, and joining us from Antwerp in Belgium, Ricardo Baretsky. He is president of the European Centre for Information Policy and Security here in France. There was a minute of silence at the National Assembly earlier, particularly moved by news of the truck rampage. Citizens of Nice, back in July, 86 died in the French Riviera city in a similar attack.
The images of what happened came back. It's a permanent feeling of horror. It's terrible. It's horrible for the people in Nice, and Berlin has brought that horror back to life.
What happened here has happened there, and we are a little shocked, really.
Obviously, my thoughts are with Germans like us. They experienced the sadness that followed what happened on the promenade.
My thoughts are with them. I think of the people who are crushed for nothing. It's terrible.
It brings shivers to us, because we're parents, grandparents, and we just wonder when these atrocities will stop.
Yeah, messages of condolences pouring in from around the world. We're going to take a look now at some of the political reactions inside Germany, most notably from the right and the far right. The Eurosceptic AfD, one of their members of the European Parliament, Markus Pretzel, was quick to tweet after the attack. Here's what he had to say: "We owe it to the victims, to those affected, and to the whole population to rethink our immigration and security policy and to change it. When will he said, when will this the German state fight back? When will the hypocrisy end? Hashtag Nice, hashtag Berlin." The head of Angela Merkel's sister party, the CSU, also taking aim at the Chancellor's asylum policy.
We owe it to the victims, to those affected, and to the whole population to rethink our immigration and security policy and to change it.
Alexander Ritzman, of course, the reaction of Horst Seehofer came when there was a Pakistani asylum seeker in custody. It's no longer the case. What's your reaction?
It is really troubling and irritating that so far nobody has claimed responsibility for the attack. This is quite uncommon, so we really have no idea who is actually behind the attack, which then makes it difficult to come to conclusions. But it seems that the polarization that takes place in Germany and other European countries anyway, between people who are open towards migration and see it as something positive and open towards taking in refugees seeking shelter from war, and others who see immigrants and refugees as a problem in general and maybe even have right-wing extremist views. We have a polarization between the extreme right and the Islamists in Germany specifically. Salafists, the number is increasing. Right-wing extremists are increasing in number and in violent attacks against asylum seekers, against immigrants, against other citizens. We have the political left, which has been the extreme left, which has been very weak over the last couple of years, gaining strength because the right is so strong. So the extreme left now has a cause again to rise up against. So I'm really concerned about the growing crossover polarization, this circle of polarization that is currently going on in Germany. And this is the big struggle that we're all involved in.
And what's going to be the impact of this attack on that political climate you describe?
Well, everybody tries to use it for their already existing agenda. That's usually the case, which is difficult if you don't know who did it and if you don't know why it was done. So right now, as you mentioned earlier, the statements were referring to a suspect that seems to be not to be the perpetrator, because it should not be that hard to put the suspect into the truck in terms of evidence. There must be lots of fabrics and glass and other possibilities to nail his location to the cockpit of the truck. So obviously that was not possible, which indicates that he might not be the driver. So we really don't know anything. So we have to step back a little bit and stop the speculation and give our police and intelligence agencies the time they need to figure out what happened. A regular terrorist organization would claim responsibility, would forward their own agenda, and would call for specific action or policies. So this not happening is quite uncommon and gives room for speculation, which we should not further foster.
Ricardo Beretsky, the fact that 24 hours on, there's no claim of responsibility, what does that tell you?
Well, I intend to agree that it's not the norm. Terrorist organizations generally don't follow this trend. However, there is still the strong need across Europe, as we've seen.
We've seen it. Sorry to interrupt on that point. We've seen, for instance, in Turkey, whenever there have been attacks attributed to ISIS, there's been no claim of responsibility.
Yes, well, that's to a certain degree correct. However, it depends on where these attacks is coming from and whether they are self-motivated or not. And then this is really the difficulty that the law enforcement particularly has to understand in a situation, particularly when they don't have the real suspect maybe in their hands. The important part is how these policies is enforced in the security. And what we believe is that the security across Europe needs a proper wake-up, and it is a total reform, and so does the immigration laws. The problem is that when you marry these two, and they are not coincide with each other, they're a recipe for disaster, and this is exactly what we're witnessing.
Yeah, except that intelligence services, police, they don't like sharing all their information with other agencies.
Well, that's to a certain degree true and correct. But that is exactly why they have to realize that it's impossible to have the entire European Union and one structure unless they can manage it. The biggest problem is managing a big structure like this across border. And that is why it needs a reform. And we've said it before that it needs a proper judicial reform system across Europe, which nobody is talking about. The reality, at some point in time, they're going to have to talk about it, and they're going to have to look at it if they want to keep the European Union together.
All right, the argument for a judicial harmonization. Roland Tichy, I want to get your reaction to what Alexander Ritzman said at the outset, that politicians in Germany quick to jump to conclusions after the attack, and it highlights a growing polarization that he finds disturbing. Do you find it disturbing?
Yes, it is disturbing. And what we are seeing now, having no suspect, having no idea who did this, makes the situation even more confusing. I imagine there is one similarity with Nice. This is the drug killing many people. But the similarity stops here. In Nice, the driver was shot, and he was a certain person connected to some Islamistic organization in the one way or the other. Here we don't know who the hell did it. And as long as there is no clear answer, speculation is growing. But this is such horrifying. You cannot stop just this confusion with warm words. People are very upset. They want answers. And this is what it makes so disturbing and can even more destabilize Germany.
Destabilize Germany. Shoshana Fine, your reaction to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reaction to the events today and the destabilizing of Germany is something to think about. I mean, a lot of people from the right have spoken about that it's because of this attack arrived because of Merkel's open door policy to refugees. But quite frankly, I think that it's really got nothing to do with Merkel's open door policy to refugees. A, the man that was suspected has been released. But B, even if the attacker was a refugee, can we really hold one group responsible because of the acts of an individual. Refugee is a legal status. It seems crazy to me to put all people in the same bag. Furthermore, this is not backed up with any kind of evidence that refugees commit terrorist acts. I mean, we had an open door policy in France, and we had terrorist attacks in France, and this was not due to refugees. If you look across the Atlantic to the United States of America, well, we often hear about an association between terrorists and refugees, but actually, if we look at the figures, they're very low. The FBI produced a report a few years ago and actually spoke of only 2% of terrorist attacks being carried out by refugees. So we can really see that these assertions are based on no kinds of evidence.
Many people, all right, we'll answer this one just to clear the air on this. Many people who are associated with these attacks have, I guess you could say, confused identities, right? The attacker in Nice was French, but of Tunisian origin. We saw this, Roland Tichy mentioned this failed attack by a 12-year-old boy who's Iraqi of origin. There always is a link to some foreign country.
I think what we can see here is very much a link between the securitization of refugees, of asylum seekers, of migrants, of the outsider, and particularly of the Muslim. So this is not just something that is affecting the refugee, but we can really see a continuum of threats. But the point to be made here is, yes, of course, we can associate these terrorist threats with a certain kind of politicization of an identity, so perhaps a political appropriation of Islam. But we can't punish whole social groups because of these acts of individuals. We can't punish all Muslims. We can't punish all refugees because several committed some kind of heinous act.
All right, we've been talking in the past about the difficulty this country, France, has in integrating all those who've come over. Germany has integrated many more, and they've devoted millions, not just in settling refugees, but also integrating them. Back in May, France 24's Jessica Saltz traveled to the central state of Thuringia. She filed this report.
We are in Schlotheim, in the German state of Thuringia, a quiet town of 4,000 inhabitants that has seen its population increase by 20% over just a few months. In January, 800 refugees settled on the outskirts of the town. Most of them are from Afghanistan or Syria. Their priority is to learn German so that they can integrate quickly.
Sie ist verheiratet.
Mandy is a volunteer and comes here 3 times a week to give courses.
The goal is to learn German so that after the summer they can join the school. Some know a lot, having been to school before, but there are also children who've never gone to school, so they can't start normal classes straight away.
This residence was built very hastily after the arrival of more than 1 million asylum seekers last year. 4 social workers were recruited here to look after them, help them settle in, and advise them on administrative procedures.
School registration forms are a lot of paperwork, and they can't do it alone. Then there are job centre applications, health insurance, asylum applications, stacks of paper.
Learning the language, adapting to everyday life in Germany, it's a constant struggle for these refugees, especially since they are isolated from the rest of the population. Many of them see it as an obstacle to integration.
All students here are from Afghanistan and we only speak Dari and Farsi with each other, so we don't learn German very well.
Expedition in Germany is about another thing is good. Only my place is one village. In villages, no school, no for study for children. We want to go to one big city.
Their only daily contact with the local German population are the round trips they take between the city and the town's supermarket. But here, the sudden presence of these migrants is a cause for concern to residents.
They just put the refugees here right in front of us and wait to see what happens. They've been behaving badly, for example, the way they ride their bikes. They don't really know how to ride. I saw it again today. They don't pay attention and the cars have to brake for them.
You can't shop in peace. All the conversations back and forth, it's simply not nice. I usually go shopping in the mornings now, when I'm sure they're all still sleeping.
It's a clash of cultures on a provincial level. The local parish has recruited a group of volunteers to help ease the tensions. Their mission? To organise activities for the residents of the centre, such as these art classes. About 50 people have signed up to help.
No one knew what to expect. No one had explained anything to us. So then we decided with our priest that we'll just go there and see what's going on. And we've met such lovely people that we just thought, we have to do something.
The priest shows them a website created by local authorities that aims to put locals in touch with the newcomers. He believes it's the duty of civil society to help with the integration of refugees.
On this web page, you can say, I'm looking for a job, or I'm looking for a flat. Ich sag mal so, die Flüchtlinge,
The refugees receive support from the state, but what the state can't do is create ways for Germans and the refugees to interact with each other. This has to come from the general public themselves.
A long process, and one the Germans don't have much faith in. According to a report published in May, half of the population thinks that the presence of refugees will have a negative impact on their culture.
Alexander Ritzman, in that report that was filed back in May, we see the contrast, right? Some of the local residents who volunteer to help, and others who they've lived their whole lives in the village and they're not used to seeing people from other places. They complain about even things like the way they ride their bike. They say they're going to shop at different times. How are things going on that score?
It is really interesting, the phenomenon that the less you know about people and the less you meet them, the more afraid you are. And we see this in the history of Germany and other countries. The hostility towards immigrants or foreigners is usually highest there where there are very few or no immigrants or foreigners. And if you look at Eastern Germany, a lot of the areas that receive a lot of right-wing populist votes or have a lot of right-wing extremist organizations, there are barely any foreigners there. And this is like before the refugee situation. Now, this has changed a little bit. Foreigners to a degree are more visible. But in general, I think it really depends on the individual and on their background, on how they see their role, their openness towards other people, and if they judge every individual by what they do and not which group they belong to. And just going back a little bit, one point: most terrorists in Europe that have been framed as refugees were terrorists dressed up as refugees. They were sent by the so-called Islamic State or other organizations, and they used the terrorist flow to come into Europe. They would have come anyway. They came before, and they will come once the flow of refugees has stopped. So we cannot confuse the normal refugees with terrorists that pretend to be refugees. There's also a study by the federal police that says that, for example, Syrian refugees are less criminal than the average German, right? Other groups have other problems. So we really have to look into the details before we come up with generalizing conclusions. And we cannot forget that almost a quarter of all extremists in the field of Islamist extremism are converts. There are people from other religions or no religion at all, and the right-wing extremism that has been increasing 40% in terms of violence, 40% more violent acts against foreigners and other Germans in the last couple of years. So let's not forget that.
Alexander Ritzman, though, we've come off a year where there's the reality that you describe and there's the perception we saw with Brexit, that fear of immigrants, fear of refugees was a major player, a factor. You heard Roland Tichy earlier mention how Angela Merkel in the polls still ahead. But do you think next year's election is going to turn out to be, in a sense, a referendum on her asylum policy?
It is actually a struggle for liberal democracy. It's much more than about the fate of Ms. Merkel or some specific policy. It's about what kind of society do we want to be? How do we react if people are different? Are we interested in dialogue and in different lifestyles? Or are we want to insist that there's a specific way on how to do things? We also have to come up with more clear policies on how to deal with extremists on the other hand. Be it Islamist or right-wing or left-wing, tolerance towards the intolerant is the death of any liberal society. right? So we have to do both. We have to stay open-minded and to a degree with open arms towards those to live peacefully with us, and we have to be smarter and more sophisticated in dealing with the extremists that want to get rid of our liberal democracy and our pluralist society.
Roland Tichy, do you agree?
No, I do not agree. Yes, it is right. No confusion of refugees with terrorists and no punishing of all refugees. But as a matter of fact, there came 1 million people to Germany during 1 year. A small number of them really refugees in the sense of the word, at least 200,000 to 400,000 with faked identity. Their identity just was not checked, simply was not checked, and we have situations that a 17-year-old boy who raped and killed a young woman in Freiburg was sentenced 3 years ago in Greek for 10 years for doing the same bad thing there, but he was moved to Germany. He's still 70-year-old, and nobody checked it in the police. And people know that, and this makes people angry, and this feeling is a matter of fact, and therefore the situation on election day will be that people want more security and a more realistic position in refugees and immigration. Everybody is for immigration and helping refugees, but Germany is the only country who does not check and who has no ceiling for migration in this case. And I think people do not, or even less people accept this, and it is easy pointing to those who criticize that and call them right-wing. No, this doesn't work. This is a question in the center of society, and as long as Angela Merkel has no answers to these questions, her re-election is not a done deal.
But do you agree with Alexander Ritzman that rising intolerance could undermine liberal democracy as Germany knows it? Roland Tichy?
Pardon, I didn't get the question.
I was saying, do you agree, though, with Alexander that rising intolerance is undermining liberal democracy as Germany knows it?
Certainly it is, but you can't just defend a liberal society by making the streets safe and rules clear and defend the society against terrorism and everything like this. Liberalism is not being foolish. Even the liberal state needs a strong hand on these things which increase in Germany.
Just a quick question on this. Shoshana Fine, for all of Europe, is going to be watching first France in May, and then the elections in Germany in the fall. How much is at stake when it comes not just to Germany, but for the whole of the continent after an attack like the one we saw Monday night?
Yeah, I mean, I think Europe is in crisis at the moment. I mean, we're dealing with terrorist attacks, we're dealing with the migration crisis, we're conflating them together. Europe is closing its borders. Europe is responding to migration as a security issue. And this is really having a reproductive effect. As I said before, that we are marginalizing our people. We have left in Europe, I think so far we've got almost 5,000 migration deaths at its borders this year. Numbers are increasing. They're higher than the last year.
People, as you heard Roland Tichy say, they want to be safe, and they associate it with attacks.
Absolutely. And I think one of Europe's founding values is that of human rights and that of the right to seek protection. Asylum is a product of the Second World War, of the post-Second World War context. So if Europe wants to continue wants to continue espousing certain kinds of values and democratic practice, then it needs to embrace not only Europeans but also outsiders within this process.
All right, unfortunately, we're out of time because there's so much more to ask our panel. I want to thank you. I want to thank Alexander Ritzman for being with us from Husum. I want to thank as well Roland Tishy in Frankfurt, Ricardo Boretsky in Antwerp. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.
Thank you.
Thank you for the debate.